We welcome you back here to the Arabian Sports Talk here on 91.7 WEEM. This talk show pretty much just recapping it here. It'll be a talk show where we discuss all sports on many different levels, but alongside Ryan Davis, Lucas Card, Aiden Wilson, I'm Dawson Perrell. For today's episode, we will recap and really overall just review the college basketball season. Of course, March Madness, one of the biggest tournaments in the world when it comes to sports, just happened, just finished up about 4 days ago, with championship being on the 3rd. We're recording this on the 7th. Of course, the UConn Huskies took home their 5th national championship of the program's history. And overall, first thoughts here, of course, very, very much an upset bracket. We saw no first seeded teams reach the Elite Eight. First time that's ever happened. One of the lowest combined seed total, you could say, in the Final Four, with a 5 seed, a 9 seed, and a 5 seed and a 4 seed on the other side. So we'll just discuss the big upsets, say why that happened, discuss the Final Four, what team did the right thing, what teams that lost did the wrong things, and overall just give you a full recap. But starting off here, of course, we'll look at a hometown team, the Purdue Boilermakers, my favorite team. I know it's Ryan's favorite team. So it sucked, obviously. You got lost in the first round, the second time it's ever happened. Took a loss to the FDU, FDU. It's a tough game, as I was mentioning. They lost that one 63-58, and really after that game finished up, I just went to my bedroom. I was trying to fall asleep and I just couldn't. I had to keep on checking the score on social media because I just didn't believe it was real. So overall, just give your first reactions, Ryan. What do you think went wrong with the Purdue Boilermakers with all that hype, losing in that first round for the second time in history?
I really don't think anything. I mean, yeah, a lot of things went wrong, but one of the really good things that Fairleigh Dickinson did was try to isolate Zach Edey and double team him. They didn't really have anyone of the size to guard Zach Edey, but they double teamed him. They used their speed and everything to really try to stop him.
And FDU was also 30% from 3 in their first round matchup, hitting 7 for 23 from the field and 80% from the free throw line.
That was another point I was going to mention. I mean, Purdue only shot 19% from behind the arc. I mean, they had 16 turnovers. It's 7 more than FDU, and I think that just really messed up their game.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things was the turnovers. They only averaged, 8 a game, and they went to 16. They had 8 in the first half. That was just not real. They just didn't really look comfortable in that game.
Yeah, and as a Purdue fan, really watching them throughout the season, I definitely got worried around that March time. I mean, sure, we won the Big Ten championship, but just those last couple of games, we couldn't hit open shots. Of course, we had a lot of youth with Fletcher Lawyer, Brandon Smith in the backcourt for that freshman guard duo, and I was worried that we wouldn't make it far, but I definitely didn't think we'd be losing in the first round. As you all were mentioning, Purdue shot horribly from behind the arc. You saw many wide open shots. I mean, they were going down low a lot on Zach Edey, so that gave Purdue a lot of opportunities to sink these threes, and say they did, I think this would be a blowout for Purdue. Unfortunately, they only made 5 of 26 three-pointers, and then Zach Edey, to look at him, I mean, sure, he had an okay game. He led the entire game in scoring, but it was just not enough, and I really got to put the blame on Braden Smith himself. I think he was a very, very tough player throughout the year, but he just didn't show it in that March game. He had 8 turnovers, struggled with shooting alike with the rest of the team. So Purdue, once again, upsetting March Madness, but looking over to some other 1 seeds, I want to point out a team here in that top left corner of the bracket, the South to be specific. San Diego State, that was actually my only correct Final Four pick for my brackets. I had San Diego State beating Bama in the Sweet 16, about that, which is exactly they did. So just want to point them out. Of course, they made it to the national championship. For San Diego State, the big reason why I picked the Aztecs to go all the way is their bench production and their defense, and those are 2 really big points in March Madness and really any basketball tournament when it comes to a game on the line, win or go home. And I think that's exactly what the Aztecs have, and they showed that. Of course, they weren't this crazy hyped up team heading into it. I think they can make a big run, which they did. Took down Bama, and of course, Bama was really the team to beat heading into it. They were the overall number 1 seed, led by Brandon Miller, top 5 NBA prospect, and a great supporting cast around him. So Ryan, what you see out of San Diego State, just watching them out the tournament, what do you think Alabama, where they went wrong?
Yeah, I was really going to point out that their defense, they've played great defense all year, averaging a little over 7 steals a game and close to 4 blocks a game. I mean, they were pretty dominant on the defensive side. Nathan Mesa I can't really don't remember how to say his last name, but Nathan Massa leading the team with 232 rebounds in all.
Yeah, and they were able to limit Brandon Miller to only 9 points, and Texas A&M Coastal Christie was able to limit him to no points in their first matchup.
That was another point I was going to mention. Dawson, as you said, top 5 draft pick, like almost protected,
Yeah.
and they kept him to 9 points. He still did have 11 rebounds, but I think something you could mention for San Diego is their 5'10" senior guard, Darian Trammell, led the Aztecs with 21 points in that game.
Yeah, and just the Aztecs' path to that national championship. Of course, they had a pretty nice win. Round one, it was a close game against the College of Charleston. Final score 63-57. Then they had arguably another easy matchup with Furman. Of course, Furman had one of those bigger upsets of probably the first upset you could say when it comes to the order of the games. Took down Virginia in round one with a buzzer beater, but San Diego State took care of them, and then a lot of people are questioning, are they really good? I mean, they've only beat a 12 and then a 13 seed, but then they said we are by taking down Bama, as we were talking about, took down Creighton, and then FAU to go to the national championship. But switching over here to the top right side of the bracket, or the Midwest, of course, you got that 1 seed with Houston, 2 seed Texas, 3 seed Xavier, 4 seed IU, 5 seed Miami. Miami, we will talk about, of course, they won that side of the bracket. But first things first here, obviously I want to point out IU being a in-state team. They took down Kent State in that first round. Kent State was a possible upset pick. I had Kent State beating IU in that first round. They're a great shooting team, but IU took care of them by a total of 11-point win. But unfortunately, that Miami team was just a bit too strong for them. They took a loss there. Miami, of course, also taking down Houston by a pretty wide margin to go all the way to the Final Four. And arguably, I would say Miami had the hardest path out of every team in the tournament, taking down Drake, which is a very tough 12 seed, IU, Houston, and then Texas, and then eventually losing to, of course, the eventual national champions, UConn. But Ryan, what'd you see out of the Hurricanes, the U, in that tournament, leading all the way up to the Final Four?
Yeah, they're really dominant in transition, just overall offense, averaging close to 80 a game, and then they averaged 9 offensive rebounds per game. And then you said the dominant win over Houston, 89-75, really showed they were a big contender.
Also, the pure size of Miami, they're one of the bigger teams in college basketball with their 2 guards who are like 6'5", 6'6", which is a very big matchup problem for some of these smaller teams.
I mean, yeah, I think they proved themselves worthy of. I mean, they were even called a football school at one point coming into this tournament. So I believe they definitely proved themselves as they beat the number 1 Houston and then eventually number 2 Texas. But I just think their luck ran out, obviously, as they lost by only 13 to UConn, which you said won the national title. So I don't think they had a bad season. I just think they are getting used to being fitting in as being a basketball school.
Yeah, and then for Houston, of course, they're another one of those teams that were widely known as a top 2, arguably best team in the nation heading into the tournament, and they definitely could make a case for that. Of course, they were led by a future draft player, arguably lottery pick Marcus Sacer, had a great season, averaging 16.8, along with that 3.1 assists a game, and overall, just zooming in on that Miami-Houston matchup where Houston's path came to an end. Once again, it was poor shooting for the number 1 seed. They shot 37.5% compared to Miami, who shot just over 50% from the floor. And on top of that, Miami from behind the arc, 44%. So I think Miami really struggled to guard them. But not only that, Houston was really widely known as this best offense, this powerhouse of an offense heading into that Miami game. And overall, zooming out, I'd say based on Miami's other games, I'd say Miami shut them, or Houston's other games, Miami shut them down. I think it's exactly what bought them that ticket to the Final Four. But going down here to the west side, another upset I correctly predicted with Kansas losing in the second round. Of course, Kansas being that 1 seed on that side, UCLA the 2 seed, 3 seed was, Gonzaga, then the 4 seed UConn, who of course won it all. But Kansas, looking in on that matchup, they destroyed Howard in that first round by just 31 points, and then losing to Arkansas in that second round by just a point. Another, as I was mentioning, another upset I correctly predicted. But just breaking down all these number 1 losses in that second round, another one, of course. But Ryan, what would you say in your reactions on that game? What do you think went wrong for the Jayhawks?
Yeah, I feel like, well, I think I saw a thing that it was the first time since 1979 that either Kansas, Duke, or North Carolina wasn't in the Sweet 16, I'm pretty sure. I mean, that's pretty big because they all those are dominant schools. Kansas winning it last year, but I mean, Arkansas was a number 8 seed. They were really looked looked they were really just looked past. They weren't really seen as a very good team, but I mean, they came out and showed out beating Kansas.
Yeah, Arkansas had to face number 9 Illinois, and then they had to battle against some injuries, not too major of injuries, but that limited Arkansas. But Arkansas is a very good defensive team, and they were able to hold their own against the Kansas Jayhawks.
As Ryan said, I mean, they were looked over, and I still think a player to mention is Anthony Black on that team. I think he is also overlooked in the draft. He could be a great potential pick. And speaking of Kansas, I mean, the expected lottery pick, Grady Dick only ended his last game of the season with 7 points in the second round. I think Kansas just fell through. They got under the pressure, and it just knocked them out.
Yeah, and as you mentioned it with Anthony Black, Aiden, I personally love him. I think he'll be a great NBA prospect, one of my favorites heading into the draft. And yeah, he was a huge reason why Arkansas was able to take down Kansas. But of course, you look at the Huskies. Also in that West Side, they came out on top. And I mean, just looking at their track record throughout, one of the most impressive tournaments runs we've seen in a while. Not necessarily a Cinderella, not these crazy moments, but just blowout wins. They won the first game, the first round against Iona by over 20 points, which a lot of people were predicting Iona to win that one. That was a very popular upset pick, but UConn proved them wrong. Went on to St. Mary's, another tough matchup. That can St. Mary, of course, can really shoot the ball well. They crushed them by 15 points. You look over to Arkansas, who just beat the first seed, UConn, versus Arkansas in the Sweet 16. UConn won by 20 points. Then they beat Gonzaga by nearly 30. I mean, UConn just sweeping, arguably, this entire tournament, leading them all the way to claim their 5th title, as I was mentioning. But as Ryan was saying there, this tournament was very weird because we don't really see all these classic, very traditional teams that we see in the Final Four with Duke, UNC, Kansas. Arguably, you can look at not Bama necessarily, but maybe Duke, UNC, as I was mentioning, Kentucky, even not in the Final Four. And I think this was arguably the biggest upset year. We saw a number 1 seed fall. We saw no 1 or 2 seeds in the Elite 8. Sorry about that. But just zooming in here on the most important game of the tournament with the national championship, UConn, San Diego State. I was pretty hyped for this matchup. Of course, I was cheering for San Diego State. You got to cheer for the upset. And on top of that, as I was mentioning, had them going to the Final Four. UConn really just proved that their defense is too tough to go against. San Diego State really just looked so frustrated from the tip-off. From that very first possession, they were frustrated, and UConn got in the Aztecs' heads and really proved that UConn was the better team, and I think they were very deserving of that national championship. Just taking a look at some of the stats for that game, San Diego State shooting only 32.2% from the floor compared to UConn's 43.4% from behind the arc. The Aztecs didn't do a horrible job shooting 26.1, UConn shooting 35.3, but the big factor here for that game, of course, turnovers was pretty even battle there. And honestly, when you look at the stats, they were all pretty even. But one thing I'll point out for the assist total, UConn had 13 assists, Aztecs only had 7, and that really just shows how frustrating that UConn defense was and how much they interfered with San Diego State's flow. But Ryan, not sure if you were watching that game. If you were, what'd you really see out of both of those teams? What do you think UConn did right, Aztecs did wrong?
I mean, UConn just one of the most dominant teams in this tournament this year, outscoring every single team that they played this year by at least 20, an average of 20 points. But Adma Sanogo is just one of the most dominant players right now. Just had a great season, averaging 7.2 points a game and 7.7 rebounds. Just great player. Try to go down low with him. That's what they did.
And the UConn Huskies also had 6 blocks in that game compared to the Aztecs 2. So very defensively motivated for the UConn Huskies. And now they're one of the only teams in college basketball that are undefeated in the national championship.
I mean, yeah, I don't think the San Diego State did anything wrong necessarily, but I think UConn was just too strong for them. As we were mentioning earlier, I mean, good programs. Gonzaga, they knocked out Gonzaga. They've been consistent for a few years now with Jalen Suggs and even Chet Holmgren. But hold on, I forgot what I was going to say.
Yeah, good.
I mean, yeah, as they sent Drew Timmy home and the Bulldogs with the final score of 82-54, I think they were just too dominant from the beginning. And once they got to the Sweet 16, they had a 51% voting percentage to take the Natty back to Connecticut.
Yeah, and then you look just at the player statistics for that game. Of course, a big name to mention out there, Tristan Newton for the Huskies. He led the game in scoring with 19 points on the evening. On top of that, had 10 rebounds, and Newton wasn't a guy who necessarily was dominant throughout the tournament. Really didn't have any other spectacular games. You look back to that St. Mary's game where he had 13, but other than that, had 6 points, 8 points, 7 points, but he really proved it on a big stage. He can get it done, led the game with 19 points as well as shooting 5 for 11 from the floor. 8 for 8 from the free throw line was perfect there, which is just so difficult to get it done from the free throw line on a big stage like that. But overall, I think, as we were mentioning here, Huskies very deserving. But as we finish up recapping, we'll go ahead and look forward for the future of all teams, more specifically some Indiana teams. Of course, most listeners care more about those teams, but I want to first off look for the Purdue Boilermakers. Being a Purdue fan, of course, the big question for the Boilermakers is, does Zach Edey stay? He's a big question mark. I mean, obviously, I would say maybe 2 months back, a lot of people said he would, but now almost that a lot of people arguing he's going to want a revenge tour. He's going to want another chance at it. And coming off of a National Player of the Year, several awards, one of the most accomplished seasons we've seen in quite a while from a player, I think he might be able to stay. I think you look at his play style, he's really a bread and butter type of guy. He sticks with the post hook, doesn't really switch it up much, doesn't have a jump shot. And honestly, although I love him, I don't think he can get anything done in the NBA. So I think it's going to be smart for him to stay, maybe make himself a defensive-oriented, brand himself as a defensive player. So when he goes in the draft, he can be branded more as a Rudy Gobert type of guy that has this giant wingspan that is tough to score on rather than this just offensive threat, which really in the NBA he won't be. But Ryan, what do you think the future of the Purdue Boilermakers? Of course, went 29-6, won the Big Ten, but fell short in that March Madness. What do you think their future is?
I think their future still is bright. I feel like Zach Edey does not go to the draft this year. Just try to get more practice, as you said, get a defensive threat, maybe work on a little bit more footwork, try to get better overall. I mean, I don't know. A lot of people at that size can't really have a jumper because their hands are just so big, covers the entire ball. But I mean, he was dominant this year, National Player of the Year. Barely anyone could stop him. But I mean, defense was one of the biggest things that he could work on, and I feel like that really set him.
I feel like Zach Edey might try to test the market, go to the combine, think what other teams think he needs to improve on, comes back to Purdue, focuses on those certain skill points that the scouts tell him to work on, and then he improved on that point, and then he increases his draft stock to probably a late first rounder next year.
I think that honestly would be a good idea, just to go to the combine, like you said, see what the scouts think, what he can improve on. I think he will go into the market, though. As you said, he was not going to develop very much in the NBA, but he does need to develop that shot. So I feel like if he can get to a team that is more outspread and three-point reliant, then I feel like he could honestly develop that shot and maybe do something in the NBA, like you said, as a Rudy Gobert, maybe even a Miles Turner. But as you see these big men in the league nowadays, pretty much every single one of them can shoot. So if he can develop that shot, he can have a chance in the NBA.
Yeah, and if you look back for Purdue last year, a similar player who was in a similar spot for Trevion Williams, of course, wasn't as accomplished, but he was a senior last year for Purdue. The year before that was a junior. He thought of going into the draft. He even went to the combine, but then he drew his name out of the hat, went back to Purdue. So it wouldn't surprise me if Zach Edey does a similar situation. But for the other Purdue Boilermaker team, of course, you got the freshman duo, as I mentioned earlier, with Fletcher Loyer and Brandon Smith. Brandon Newman, one of the good defensive guards for Purdue, can shoot the ball as well. Already entered the transfer portal pretty early, so he'll be gone, so the need for a guard will increase that much more. And I think that those two players, that's pretty much Purdue's future as of now. I think he got some great recruits coming in. Of course, Miles Colvin, Ryan and I saw him play for the high school for Heritage Christian. He has a bright future, but I think the bottom line that Purdue needs, they need players that can actually shoot the ball and make it when it's on a big stage. I mean, again, Brandon Smith Fletcher Loyer, Brandon Newman, they can all shoot the ball. Mason Gillis had 8 threes in a game, but really on that March stage, they struggled. So I think they need a consistent shooter, but most of all, I think Purdue needs an athletic player, Jaden Ivey type guy that can push that floor, that can push the pace and really score on transition. You look at Purdue's highlights, they don't really have a player that's going to drive the ball and slam it on someone's head like Jaden Ivey could. They have a lot of players that'll take it slow. And I think there's a question to be made about, is it Matt Painter rather than the team itself? That is the reason for Purdue's tournament struggles. But I think the bottom line is Matt Painter is a slow, hard-nosed coach, and that doesn't really work well in March. I'm not saying I want him fired at all. I love Matt Painter, has done so much for the program, brought in so many recruits, but I think there's definitely a question mark to be had when it comes to, if you want tournament success, is Matt Painter the way, or is maybe another coach going to have to go?
Yeah, I mean, Purdue's biggest thing was they slowed down the pace of play, really try to get it down low to Zach Edey. If not, they try to pass it out. They were never the team that will speed up the pace of play on those transitions, try to get them out of order, try to get there before they can set up their defense. They were never that team. Try to get it down low where Zach Edey can set up before.
And in March, FDU decided to speed up the Boilermakers, and that's where Purdue gets into trouble when they play fast. They have more turnovers like they did against Northwestern and on teams in the Big Ten that really tried to push the pace against the Boilermakers.
I mean, yeah, I can agree. And as you said, they have Miles Coven coming in, and they also have Cannon Catchings from Brownsburg. So I feel like once they get those Jaden Ivey type players, they will have a shot in the March Madness. But as we go back to Zach Edey, not to get off topic, but I feel like if he would go to the G League and maybe develop for a little bit, that could help him get into the NBA, which also brings the question, is college even necessary to get into the NBA at this point?
Yeah, but switching over here as we enter our final few minutes, moving over to the other big Indiana team, of course, Purdue's rivals, the IU Hoosiers. IU, of course, their future isn't looking as bright, at least in my opinion. You had Jalen Hood-Schifino already declare, and as well as Trice Jackson Davis declare here recently as well. You got a decent future with some other players around, but you definitely don't have that star anymore with both of those two guys leaving. Before the future of IU, of course, had a great season this year. You made it to the second round. Sure, you had a tough loss to Miami, but fortunately, at least unfortunate for me, you beat Purdue, your rival, twice. You had a decent run in the Big Ten tournament, but unfortunately just didn't get it done. And I would say that IU at the preseason polls next year we won't be seeing them in the top 25, losing so much talent this offseason, but I think they could still make a run for the Big Ten title. I mean, they're another blue blood team. They have 5 banners, and they're really going to always be a threat no matter their team. They have a great coach, in my opinion. So, Ryan, as we close out here, any thoughts on Purdue rivals IU, maybe their future with the basketball program?
I think they have not as bright as future as Purdue right now, but I think Trice Jackson Davis did a really good job as being that big role model for the team, being the senior that he was. He was a great player, one of the best. IU, I think the best player on IU this year. I mean, Jalen Hood-Schifino also really came out in the second half of the season.
Yeah, IU's been looking at some transfer portal people. One of their commits have been Peyton Sparks from Ball State, and right now they're looking at the Harvard transfer, Chris Lindum from Harvard. He's another big-time transfer portal player who didn't make it into March because Harvard's not known for their tournament success, but they're also in a very competitive league. The Ivy League and the Princeton Tigers did make it pretty far this year.
I'm not saying that these players will do, as Lucas said earlier, go into the combine, come back out just to see what they can improve on. But I know that Trice Jackson Davis does not have a good draft review. Yeah. And I mean, Jalen Hood-Schifino could, because he's a two-way player, 6'6" guard.
Young guy.
I mean, he's a good young player, but I feel like at least Trice Jackson Davis could have the opportunity or the chance to pull out of that draft.
All right, but with that is all the time we have. We hope you all enjoyed listening just as much as we did talking. You can tune in here soon. We'll be talking about more sports news coming up next in about a week or so here on the Arabian Sports Talk 91.7 WEEM.